Welcome back to another episode of Inside the Vault, a Carolina Panthers podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Smith. And as you know by now, this podcast brought to you by the Keep Pounding Podcast Network. Follow them on Twitter at KPPounding_FSSN. And this podcast also powered by the Fans First Sports Network on Twitter at FansFirstSN. Rate, review, subscribe to the Tobacco Radio Sports YouTube channel at youtube.com/Tobacco Radio. Well, here on episode number 27 of Inside the Vault, my latest guest is an Emmy Award winner, Fox Sports NFL play-by-play announcer. You've also heard him on Fox for NASCAR, MLB, and he even has a book coming out in November of this year around about time. We'll discuss that more down the road, but he's also been a reporter on multiple Super Bowls and World Series for the Fox television network, and been at Fox since 1998, but the NFL coverage specifically since 2003. He is Chris Myers. Follow him on Twitter at _Chris Myers. Chris, how's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me on. It's nice to talk to you.
Yeah, you too. It's funny when I reached out to you to talk about the Panthers. A lot of people are like, "Wait, Ryan, are you serious? Why would I come on and talk about the Panthers?" But you actually hosted a few of their games this year on Fox, and so we'll get to those specifically in a little bit. But from your broadcasting national perspective, recap the 2023 season of the Carolina Panthers before we go into the kind of the recent stuff going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I had to look back to it because I've always enjoyed through the years doing Panther games when Ron Rivera was there and their playoff runs. In fact, was on the sideline when they went to the Super Bowl and interviewed Rivera at the half and then Cam Newton afterwards when they won the championship game to go on in cold snow. This was a disappointment this past. I think we were all shocked. Bryce Young, I thought, was an okay pick to start. I mean, we won't know. I mean, we saw what happened with C.J. Stroud. Anthony Richardson got hurt. I mean, there were other options there, but I just expected, well, I think everybody did, including ownership, which is why there was the change. Frank Reich coming back. It was a good story as a Panther guy coming back to the team, and it just wasn't there, and I could sense it early, and I didn't want to blame just the rookie quarterback and a new staff, but it just wasn't clicking. You could feel that, especially after having called some of their games late the previous year, and I actually stepped out a little of my comfort zone. Steve Wilkes, I thought, was a capable candidate to be the head coach, as he, on an interim basis, really did some good things, including knocking off the Lions late in the year when they were steamrolling their way, looking like a playoff team again prior to last season. So that's why we are where we are in terms of the Panthers team. So a season of disappointment. You need to make changes. How you go about it, that's all kind of out of my area. But in terms of Bryce Young, I am a believer in him. He's got to do a lot of other things, but I don't think again, there's a lot of pressure. Jerry Goff was a number 1 overall pick, and you saw he later got dealt. So there's pressure with that. But if you're smart, he's a good guy. He's a hardworking guy. He's got some ability. There's some improvements he has to make, but I think you can build a team around him. And so that's why, looking forward, I would be optimistic. And the division always comes under criticism, and rightfully so, because we don't have teams running away with double-digit victories. So that leaves some hope for a quicker turnaround. I mean, the Buccaneers, who I've called some of their games, it was amazing what they were able to do when people were calling them a 3 or 4 win team.
Yeah. A quick side note on Steve Wilkes. I think a lot of people who may be outside of North Carolina may not know this, but right, you just mentioned it. Steve Wilkes, as Panthers interim coach, beat the Lions with Dan Campbell, and now with the 49ers, he did the same thing last week. So Steve Wilkes has the Lions number here lately, but that's just an aside for us Panther fans here. I'm sure they, some Panther fans on your view with right before Wright got hired with Wilkes, but that's all water under the bridge at this point. But you make a good point. The NFL has grown in such popularity over the last 10, 15, 20 years, Panthers being an expansion team from 1995. So still a relatively new franchise in terms of teams. And it's funny, you mentioned going with the Panthers in the Super Bowl in 2015, Ron Rivera, Cam Newton, Greg Olsen, who's now killing it in the broadcast booth, and so many different people on that team. Kuechly at linebacker. Yeah, the NFL can humble you in just a quick minute. It seems like the Panthers were right? Like you said, 2015, just 8 years ago, they were right there going to the Super Bowl, and now they're worst team in the league, first team ever to go 2-15 overall with this new 17 game schedule. So I guess that leads me into before we go into one of your games that you had for the Panthers this past year. How important is it for teams like the Panthers to get these hires right? Because, like you said, you can see from one year you're at the top of the mountain, in just a short period of time you're down at the bottom. I actually had Anish Sharaff on last week, the Panthers play-by-play man, and he talked about alignment and getting this right for the Panthers going forward between the head coach, GM, and the owner. So, for fans out there who may be a bit naive to the word alignment, just how important is it to have alignment throughout your front office and the coaching staff to succeed in the NFL?
Well, yeah, you have to have the right people from an owner to a general manager, so the personnel guy and his staff. However, they bring in the talent and the coach. Then the coach has to get the most. If you're not all kind of working on the same page and in concert, there, it's just not gonna happen. And I think if you know early, you don't have that right. Now, in fairness, I mean, you used to get, coaches would get a little bit more time to kind of build a franchise. So if you don't have a quarterback to start, you're in trouble. And if you draft a young quarterback, well, then you do need time to develop him. The Panthers felt that Reich and Young, it wasn't going the right way, it wasn't the right mix. So why waste anybody's time? It's a fast food, fast lane kind of world we live in. So you
Yeah.
got to go ahead and make the change. I can speak firsthand from with Dave Canales. I quite a few years back, the early years of Russell Wilson's career in Seattle with Pete Carroll, and then Canales was there, and he was just the offensive coordinator for 1 year, getting his first chance. You know the history, I'm sure the listeners do. That
Yeah.
was his big break in his 40s to finally become an OC, an offensive coordinator, for the first time and call plays in the NFL for the first time. And he does it with a Tampa team that, offensively, they were replacing Tom Brady. Baker Mayfield comes in. I don't think people knew what to expect. He got the most and the best out of that situation. And I spent some time around him doing Buccaneer preseason games. And he's got a little bit of the Pete Carroll, but he's got his own way of doing things. And so he's not just a guy who can get the most out of a quarterback. He's a CEO with a positive kind of approach and influence on people that I think I can see why they hired him. I thought it was a little quick for for the amount of time, but obviously he struck a chord with the organization, and I think he's a guy who will be successful as a head coach. Some guys are better delegators; they're not as good in-game strategy head coaches, so they rely on their assistants more. I think he showed us something he grew as an offensive coordinator from the start of the year with Tampa towards the end. But as a head coach, I think he's already ahead of the game right there, and then he'll handle the details with his coordinator. So I think your whatever alignment, however you want to word it, with a guy like Bryce Young, I think he and Canales will grow together and have some success. Is the bottom line, is to address the other parts. You got to get other players, you got to get support around them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep, we're going to get there. My last question before we move into the Canales and Dan Morgan era now with the Panthers. I specifically could have picked many games, but I chose Panthers-Packers back on December 24th of this year. You were at that game. You called that game in Charlotte. Most people, including myself, thought that was Bryce's best game of the year. What did you see?
Absolutely was his best, and even that started out slow. We kind of saw him grow in that game. In his defense, he really has one reliable veteran receiver, and he leaned on him and throughout the season, and even clicked in that game at the end when they were almost in line, and just time ran out, literally and figuratively. I also called our broadcast crew the very first game with Bryce Young as an NFL player against Atlanta to open the season, that's when you knew things just weren't really clicking. So obviously they made the interim coaching change, but Bryce Young grew throughout the course of the year. And yes, without a doubt, that was his best game. He was running, he was throwing on the run, he was delivering. Thielen was the clutch guy in certain spots, but he didn't clue in on him. He included a lot of other people, and some of the other receivers came on even the week before and made some big catches. And in that game, I think he started to feel like, okay, now I can trust certain people to get the ball out there, and they're gonna make the play. And it was a more aggressive game plan too. I think at some point, and look, other coaches. I'll tell you the other side of that. Matt LaFleur was telling us with Jordan Love, his first year as a starter, he said, I had to earlier in the year admit that it was time for me to, to quit, take the training wheels off, let the guy go. He's working hard enough. He's been in the league. Let the quarterback has to play with confidence, rip it. Don't be foolish. Don't be reckless. And we saw a little bit of that kind of growth on the other side in Bryce Young. So yes, that was in terms of the games that I saw and through the course of the year. It's unfortunate because it's all about wins, but we saw a lot of growth there, and that was his best game. And you have to pass to win in this league today. I mean, you can run the ball successfully and have good defense, but ultimately you got to be able to throw the ball in key situations. He showed he could do that, and they went up against a very good team that went on into the playoffs and had success.
Yeah. Before we get into Canales and Morgan specifically, looking at the Panthers' needs this offseason, from an outsider view, you mentioned a few things, weapons, the interior offensive line specifically was what was injured all of last season for the Panthers. We started, I don't know, 9 to 10 different guard combinations throughout the year. What would you say is the biggest need for the Panthers this offseason?
Yeah, I would say you hit it. Offensive line, additional receiving, and all, and that doesn't have to be a first round, Jamar Chase. That's somebody that, but you can get in later rounds or look for certain receivers who are available. You have to have more than one. They don't really have. I mean, Thielen is again, not that you need the superstar. There's only so many superstar receivers that are in that category, like we have seen when Kansas City lost their receiver to the Dolphins. It's like, wow, they were able to fill that with other things, but that's because they have Mahomes. So Bryce Young needs a little bit of that support. I think the running game with the offensive line has been steady enough and has been good enough for them. And defensively, I thought they did a good job in the games that I saw. They hung together with the player, and they had a lot of injuries too. And so to me, there's not a whole lot on. You just need to be healthy on defense. You need healthy corners. You need Horn to stay healthy for an entire season, right? I mean,
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
You can count on him to be the top cover guy that you have. But that's what I would address first. And those the offensive line additional receipt. First of all, do whatever you have to do to give Bryce Young more support so he can grow into the star that he needs to be, and I think he can be. And then you can worry about filling in other spots, like on the defense or whatever. But offensive line, receiver, maybe in a game-breaking tight end, that type of thing. If you can find a Sam Laporta type, they don't have to be Kittle or Kelsey, but there's those guys out there if you do your homework.
Yeah. So the Panthers, as you alluded to earlier, as we get into Dave Canales, the 7th head coach in franchise history, was hired this year, following a number of people, including Frank Reich, John Fox, who you mentioned, Ron Rivera, and Dom Capers, who was our very first head coach, was actually ironically on Reich's staff this past year, and still no word whether he will be not on Canales' staff or not. We do know Jim Caldwell will be retained from Frank's Reich staff, so I think that's a really good hire there by Canales. Talk to me. What is Fox saying? What are the media? What's the media guru saying about Frank Canales? Is this hire? Did the Panthers get this a guy a year early that most people didn't want to interview, and like maybe he was Ben Johnson from 2022, and before Ben Johnson stayed, of course, as we now know. What is Fox saying? What is the media saying about this hire? Do they like?
Well, I mean, for those that weren't around him as much, I think they're really shocked. We weren't shocked that he got head coaching. When I say we, some of those who had spent time with us, as I touched on. If you were around him, you would say when we have our production meetings, when there's no cameras and we get time, we get to access to practice when the other media doesn't have it. This is the advantages when you're calling a game, and this is so we can bring the game to the audience much more clearly. Coaches will spend some time with us and coordinators, and they'll tell us some things, even if they're off the record, it's information we can use. We just can't attribute it to them, or we can use it as background information to call a game. So there's certain guys you could tell along the way through the years, right? I could tell Sean McVay had it, whatever. Raheem Morris had it. Well, how successful they are when they're assistants, when they get that big head coaching chance. You don't know. There's a lot of different personalities. You just think, but boy, this guy, I would hire this guy and work for this guy. Canales had that, Dave Canales. But however, I was somewhat surprised. I wasn't surprised he got in. I was surprised that it did happen early. You touched it, maybe got him a year early, but you know what? Better to get him a year early than be late and not be able to get him if that's the guy you really want. Just like when you're drafting a quarterback or trying to sign a free agent player. And I think they saw something in him, which I think anybody would if you sat down or if you watched him coach and handle certain situations. Perfect example. I asked him about something about his quarterback when things go wrong. And he said, well, that's going to happen in a game. I'm looking for how that quarterback responds in when things don't go right, because there's times in a game where the play's not sent in or the wrong player, the player how he handles that. Yes, the guy could hit the wide open receiver. Aside from all the other things, that's another thing I'm looking for, and I want to make sure as a coach that quarterback and that is going to be better in that situation next time, or prepared as much as one can be to handle those situations. So that was part of his coaching and teaching that stood out to me, and we saw that with Baker Mayfield. Even though he's more of a veteran, he shined in that. So I could see, if you wanted a guy to bring along your quarterback, an offensive minded guy who has as I said, kind of the CEO, the face of the franchise look as a coach, and personality that handled tough situations, tough questions. Canales had that. So that our view of that, for those that have been around him, it's like, yeah, maybe a little early, but he's going to grow into the job with his quarterback, and hopefully the support of the ownership and the fans will like him, and hopefully that will produce wins and victories. I would be surprised if he's not successful. Now the question is, how soon will we see it? He's got to show up and wins. Second, third. Do you get 3 years? You got to see signs that you're going in the right direction. And there weren't enough of those early for Frank Reich in the eyes of the bosses. I think you'll see that faster with Canales.
Yeah, and here on Inside the Vault, my name is Ryan Smith. Chris Myers is my guest today. 3 more for you, Chris, and we'll get you out of here with some predictions going forward. Sean McVay, as we know, you mentioned him, was not a hire that everyone was just clamoring to hire. He was also kind of a sneaky hire for the Rams. You mentioned him, and then you mentioned year 2, maybe year 3 for Canales with wins. Well, no one saw the Texans and CJ Stroud with the DeMeco Ryans also doing the same thing this year. So
Right.
you just never know what's going to happen in the NFL to any given Sunday league. You can turn around fast. The Panthers going into Dan Morgan now, he was our middle linebacker in 2001.
Yeah.
Team went 1-15, Super Bowl 24 months later against the Patriots. So really, you can turn around fast in this league. Panthers did promote Dan Morgan to GM. And then what I thought was a major coup for David Tepper, Executive Vice President of Football Operations Brant Tillis from the Kansas City Chiefs, his new title there. I thought that was an absolute home run hire for David Tepper.
Anytime you get somebody from other successful organizations that have been there recently and consistently, Kansas City, San Francisco, obviously Canales was in Seattle all those years when Pete Carroll, when they were contending on a regular basis. These are good moves, and Dan Morgan, you have that homegrown connection, so to speak. Somebody who's kind of grown up in the franchise, gets what the Panther fans want, what Carolina's all about. And obviously ownership believing in him. But you hit on something that I thought was important, and I think it accelerated the fact that you had a rookie head coach in DeMeco Ryans and a rookie quarterback in CJ Stroud have the kind of success that they had, not only winning a division, winning a playoff game so fast, even though not a lot of people expected it. It puts pressure, and I think not just in the Panthers situation, and other places where they hired head coaches, like, hey, we better see, especially if you're getting a top pick. We want results soon. I was a little surprised Chicago held on to their head coach, and we already had we have eight coaching.
That's right. Yep.
Head coaching changes, and Harbaugh probably landed in the best spot, just to expound a little bit with the Chargers, because he has a quarterback. He has a proven, established quarterback. He doesn't have to worry about growing with a rookie. He's going to have to grow with Herbert and get the most out of him. Who said, what a mess he's had to deal with since he's played in the NFL, and yet he's such a talented quarterback. So, and then there's other situations, like in Washington, Dan Quinn's going to have a top second pick at the moment as we're talking. It could be a quarterback that they want to grow with, that type of thing. There'll be pressure on to have success there, but the turnaround is fast. If you put those people in place that you talked about, and you're comfortable with that, you got to have a good draft. That's important too. I mean, those are the pieces that Houston. It wasn't just C.J. Stroud. They got Will Anderson. They hit on a lot of their picks, and they signed a veteran like a Dalton Schultz. Yep. They drafted a Tank Dell a little later, top flight receiver. That's the kind of thing I'm thinking about Carolina can do. So yes, I think in the division you can turn it around. Atlanta's going to have a new head coach. They still really need their quarterback. Obviously, the Buccaneers are going to have a new head coach. I mean, a new offensive coordinator. Excuse me. They have Todd Bowles returning, and they should have Baker Mayfield again, so they won't have necessarily the new quarterback. The Saints have changed offensive coordinators. They kept their head coach. They still have Derek Carr. So, but Dennis Allen is still their defensive-minded head coach. And then there's the Carolina situation. It's similar to how we went into last year, thinking, okay, who's gonna make the move? Most were thinking New Orleans with the veteran quarterback, or maybe Atlanta with all the talent they've drafted. But it was a surprise with the Bucs. Panthers could provide that surprise with the right offseason moves and the right kind of coaching going into the year.
Yeah, we'll see on how that goes. The ideal offseason for the Panthers is what? Give us the blueprint in Chris Myers' mind. What does that look like?
Okay. Well, we still have to study the draft a little bit, and
Sure.
I'm not as far as what free agents are available. Maybe a T. Higgins. If you get him, you add him with drafting a younger receiver that's going to add some speed. There's some different moves you can make there. The offensive line, we talked about drafting in that spot. Really, the growth and the connection with this coaching staff, with Canales, his offensive coordinator, who he brought in from the Rams, I believe, right? The OC, has that been decided yet? Determined? I think that there was somebody he had worked with who I liked when I saw his credentials and had been around him. So I would say that's really where it starts. And defensively, you've got to maintain some of your studs, and you've got to make sure you have the same. When the Panthers are winning, that same tough defense. But I would say use your draft picks wisely to sum up, and a couple of key free agents without overspending. And getting the right people around Bryce Young, along with the coaching staff, and I think you can make a lot of progress fast. It's that kind of division.
And last one for you before we get a prediction from you and get you out of here. Speaking of Bryce Young, what is the we'll say top two things on his to-do list this offseason to have a successful 2024?
Well, I think, he wasn't a guy who made a lot of mistakes. Obviously, the touchdown to interception ratio is very important. I think, and I saw this with some of the other young quarterbacks, because we got to call a lot of the games of guys who are coming into the league and through the year. He has to physically bulk up a lot, right? So without losing kind of his speed and comfort level, has to be a little stronger physically so he can take some hits. I think he's not a running quarterback; he's a thinking quarterback. And a few times I was around him, I get it how smart he is. I think in the same system and with the same players, that's not a problem. I think he's going to be okay with that. I think he'll handle the pre-snap and post-snap reads even better than we saw in that game against Green Bay. So physically bulking up a little bit more, a little bit more downfield, probably accuracy. I think he's got enough of an arm to win in the NFL, and taking control of the offense, which he's got the mind to do. And he does have that instinctual. This is why I think he was drafted. We saw it in college. I saw a little bit of that in the NFL. We'll see more of that when he's comfortable. Kind of that the thing you can't count on, the unpredictability, where he'll make a crazy play or make a throw that you go, wow, I can't believe he's doing that, and then it's a good throw. So I think he's got that. But the physical part, bulking up on that pretty much, and because you do need to run in certain situations, and you do need to take the hits and hang in there, which he has shown he can do.
And we'll end it on this. I might be putting you on the spot a little bit here. Boldest prediction for the Panthers in 2024. What is your bold prediction? It can be about the team, Bryce Young, individually, individual player. What is your boldest prediction for the Panthers in 2024?
Well, I'll say, as long as he stays healthy, that Bryce Young will have a very productive year. And what I mean by that is, 25 touchdown passes, less than 10 interceptions. Okay, we're gonna watch that with what Canales and staff does with him. It's hard to predict without looking at the schedule and seeing what else they're adding to their team. But I would expect, I'll just say this, that they're not going to be a last place team. I will say that about the Panthers, if that's bold or not. And that's faith in Canales, and also faith in Bryce Young, that you'll see enough there out of them to make a difference where it keeps them out of the cellar. Whether they can contend or not, that'll depend on a lot of other things when we get a little closer to the start of the season.
I think if the if Panthers can go from 2 wins to 6, 7 wins, quadruple their wins, I think fans will be happy with that progress for sure.
Yeah, and you got to beat the teams in your division. I mean, right? At least you don't have to sweep them, but you got to at least split, and then maybe take an advantage. Get one of them somewhere. They didn't do enough of that. You do more of that, you're going to be in contention, especially the way the NFC South looks.
And that's a good place to end it. As I said at the top, my guest today has been Chris Myers. He is Fox NFL play-by-play, NFL coverage since 2003. Called Panthers versus Packers back on Christmas Eve, and he will surely call some more Panther games here in the future. Chris, thank you for coming here on Inside the Vault. It was a pleasure talking with you, and we'll chat down the road.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and yeah, we'll talk again when the season starts or when we get close to the season. We'll have a better gauge on what we think the Panthers should do.
And that'll wrap up this episode of Inside the Vault, a Carolina Panthers podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Smith. Please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast, and we will see you next time.